Welcome back to the channel, friends. Greetings, I am the GM Philosopher, and today we're talking about handling player versus player drama in your Dungeons & Dragons games. Now, real quick before I jump into this, I have to give a shout out to the person who requested this topic, and I hope that I don't mispronounce this, but Tua33 basically said in a comment, PvP drama tips would be nice also. So you know what, Tua33, fantastic. Thank you for the comment. I always appreciate requests, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Sometimes your players do not just simply have drama with NPCs or your antagonists. Sometimes they also have drama with each other, and sometimes this can even spiral into combat, player-on-player combat, etc. How do I handle it? How can you handle it? I have dealt with this a lot, and I have some tips to help you. We're just going to dive right into it. Tip number one, determine whether or not you're even going to allow this. Now, I always err on the side of allowing it with the following 4 tips used to mitigate, because I don't really like banning players from having drama with each other. Player drama can really enhance the game. It can make the game way more fun. It can make it way more engaging. And even though there is some risk that comes with it, which I will talk about in my following 4 tips, it's really important to understand that above all else, I value player agency in D&D. And so I don't want to take away player agency by making some kind of rule like you're not allowed to attack a party member. You're not allowed to steal from each other. You're not allowed to sneak around on each other. I feel like this is too stifling and places too many parameters on the game. With the exception maybe being if I were running a game with little kids or maybe even middle school age kids, because they could actually delve into things they don't understand and hurt each other's feelings. If it's teenagers or up, I'm saying player drama is allowed with stipulations, and I'm going to talk about what that is. With that being said, I have played in games where the GMs absolutely forbade player drama and player combat. You can choose which route you want to take, but I err on the side of free will and agency on that. Tip number 2, before hurtful things happen, stop the game and remind everyone that it's in-game and check in with them, okay? So for example, one time I had a situation where one of my players was a barbarian, and I had a player who was a cleric, and the barbarian and the cleric had gotten into an argument over an artifact the cleric had. And I believe, if I remember correctly, this has been a while ago, but I believe the argument was that everyone was sort of convinced that this artifact was allowing their enemy to spy on them. And yet, so they were going to like get rid of it or destroy it. But this cleric insisted on keeping it and wouldn't really explain his reasons for it. And so the party was really upset with him, especially the barbarian. And it got to the point where the barbarian said, I'm going to attack you if you do not give me that artifact. Now, the details of this are a little spotty because it has been years since we played this campaign, but I'm going to kind of describe what happened in the best manner I can remember. And these rules, I followed them in this manner. And this is always the way I deal with these types of things in the moment. And I've learned to do this over time, because in the earlier days when I was GMing, when player combat or something would happen, I didn't learn to check in with players, and people's feelings would legitimately get hurt. People would legitimately get angry, and it would legitimately ruin the game for some people. So I learned to do this over time. And so here's an example of what I did in this situation. In this situation, I stopped the game and I said, okay, now hold on. You all know I am fine with player combat. I'm fine with player drama. In fact, I think it's exciting and it's kind of messy and fun. With that being said, I just want to pause for a quick minute and I want to check in with you. Hey, cleric, you doing okay? I just want to make sure your feelings aren't hurt, like you're not actually mad, you're not actually upset. I want to make sure this is in game and not like a personal thing. Barbarian, you okay? I just want to make sure, right? And in this situation, the player who's playing the barbarian actually did stop. He checked himself and said, I'm actually real life frustrated because why? And he looked at the player and he says, why are you doing this? You seem to be working against the party. And they were able to have a conversation out of game as friends and resolve what could have become kind of like a almost passive aggressive in-game type thing that was based on real feelings, which is what you don't want. If you have feelings of drama outside of the game, you should resolve them outside of the game. And then you should be able to reserve what's going on in-game for role play and fun, right? It's much different to have your character get attacked by another party member and both of you are having fun and laughing about it and both of you are having fun because it's a fun part of the story. That's much different than actually being mad at each other and one person either bullying the other or something in game. These are 2 very different experiences. We do not want any bullying, any passive aggressiveness going on. What we do want is fun role play. We want immersive storytelling, and we want drama. We love drama, right? But we don't want it to come at the expense of someone's actual real life feelings. Now, and that leads me to tip number 3. Set up deterrents that make PvP drama less likely to spill over into violent territory. This technique has been used in my campaigns. I've been doing this for years, and this works super well. Generally speaking, by the time the players are high enough power level that they gain the ability to sneak around on each other, attack each other, even kill each other, right? This kind of thing, lie to each other. They all have allies in game. My games tend to be very NPC heavy because my players tend to recruit NPCs at a very high rate. It is not uncommon that by the time the players reach level 12, level 13, they literally have nearly an army of NPCs. Not all of them are well known. They'll have 1 or 2 or 3 core NPCs who serve as their like lieutenants, and then they'll have literally like an army of people. Like one of them might have conquered, like won a combat with an orc general, and then the rest of the army defected to them because they were the better leader. One of them might be recruiting street urchins, and they have a small army of like thieves and rogues. One of them might have created some kind of weird alchemical creature in their laboratory, and they've been mating and reproducing, and now they have an army of Gumby men. Like this is really happened. This is all stuff that has happened in my campaigns. And so there are usually big deterrents to player violence. If it gets to a point where if like one player draws his weapon and he's looking at another player, there are like 3 very relatively strong NPCs who also draw their weapons and say, you better not. And an army at that player character's back that will make it way more messy than just one-on-one drama, right? And so this has happened in my campaigns many times, and it usually gets to a point where they have to come to like a table and negotiate because it will literally turn into an armed conflict. Now, I realize that not every group sets their games up like this, but I actually make it a point to set up deterrents like this in my games specifically to curb player-on-player drama, not to keep it from happening, but to keep it from becoming so serious that it wrecks the game, okay? Note that it doesn't make it impossible. It has happened. In my last campaign, I had a character who literally built an army of sentient pop bots, and they became so powerful that the whole rest of the group was like, very sus, because they were like, if he right now were to decide to try to take us out, he might actually succeed. And they started putting deterrents of their own into place. They were like conspiring with each other, trying to figure out how they could curb this threat. But the threat ended up curbing itself because the sentient pop bots ended up unionizing, wanting to get paid, wanting to have more self-control over their own destinies, right? So it kind of like, and it ended up that this player took the good route and kind of set these pop bots free, and they ended up just working for him more as laborers than being like a hive mind army, which was what he created them to be. But anyway, with that all being said, placing deterrents is a very useful way to deal with this type of situation. And this leads us to number 4. Trust your players to engage in player drama, but be really careful of spiraling emotions or possible spillovers into real life. There's an element of trust that we should have in our players as GMs, to trust them to engage in drama and in a manner that is responsible. If we're gaming with responsible people, if we have good friends, good gaming compatriots, we should to a point trust them to be able to engage in drama, and we should give them the chance to do that. Stealing girlfriends from each other, trying to assassinate each other's NPCs, trying to steal each other's treasure, conspiring with the gods to cut them out of deals. Like these are all things that are not super uncommon in my games, and they're all conducted with taste and respect for the most part, and everyone has a good laugh about it. And the reason they do is because everyone conducts themselves quite respectfully. And part of that is because we've grown as a group, but also part of it is because I really only let mature and respectable gamers at my table. And so choosing your group could be as much an important part of this as not. I have in the past had to eliminate gamers for not being respectable, not handling drama in a mature way. In fact, I'm going to give you an example. Tip number 5, then this leads right into it. Be keenly aware of bullying and don't allow it to be a factor at your table. I have had situations in the past where, and this is especially true of power gamers and min-maxers, I've had situations in the past where power gamers and min-maxers have tried to bully the rest of the party by building such an optimized character that one-on-one combat wouldn't really be feasibly useful to any of the party members for fighting the character. And take into account if this character has really optimized if this player has really optimized their character, if they've gotten one or two really good high-powered NPCs under them as allies with the right skills. It could even be like I've had power gamers and min-maxers build such powerful characters that it's probably not even realistic that the whole party could take them out if they tried. This has happened before. And I'm not super against this. I'm not against min-maxing and power gaming at all. In fact, I have a couple pretty formidable min-maxers in my group right now, and it's fun. There's nothing wrong with it. Here's the difference, though. They treat it respectfully, and they respect the other players at the table. They don't try to use that to bully other people. I one time had a player who built really optimized characters, and they would literally try to bully other people in game. They would like try to throw their weight around in ways that went beyond drama to being munchkin-like and annoying, right? And this I have a problem with. And you can tell as a GM when someone's starting to verge on this. And because here's the difference. If the rest of the party can laugh about it and be cool with it, and at the end of the night, there's no problem, then there's no problem. But if people start to be like, that bothered me, or that was actually annoying, or that's actually frustrating, or it's not really fair, that made it not very fun for me, then there is actually a problem. And if the consensus is that this player is throwing their weight around too much, that to such a degree that there is a problem, then you as the GM have a responsibility to take care of it, or the leader of your group. If you're the GM, you may not necessarily be the leader of the group, but in our group, I'm kind of like the designated leader when I GM, and so I take responsibility for handling these conversations. I had one situation, and in fact, I'm going to give you contrasting ideals. One of my min-maxing players, and he's still in my group, he's the one who built the army of sentient pop bots that I referenced earlier. Now, he could have used this army truly to attack the party, to take them out, and they were kind of worried about it, but he never did it. He never did it. And behind the scenes, the players would say to me, Josh, why are you letting him do this? Like, he's got this army. And I would just be like, hey, he did it. He's creative. He used the rules. He found creative ways around certain things. He's doing it. Like I'm not going to penalize him for playing the game well and stacking some numbers and building some cool stuff. I can't do that. And they're like, it's going to become oppressive. And I was like, but it's not. And I want to trust him because I don't believe he'll make it oppressive. And the truth is, when it really came down to it, he chose to free his bot army, let them be individual, let them be sovereign, and they kind of made their own little union. They continued to work for him, but he went from being like a hive mind leader of an army who was at his beck and call to being more like the leader of a big force of sentient constructs who kind of had their own political agenda, and he had to negotiate with them. He willingly gave that to them. Like he willingly accepted that fate as part of the storyline arc. And here's the reason. It's because, and I have to give him credit for this, he cared more about the role play and the immersive storytelling than he did about the power gaming or min-maxing. And he had no interest in bullying the other party members. He had no interest in it, and he didn't do it. And for that reason, it ended out totally fine. It could have gone wrong, but it didn't. Now, I one time had a player who did a similar thing where they built an army of shadows. They were playing a necromancer, and they were storing shadows in like a bag of holding for a while, but they started to kind of overflow the bag of holding. So they had a bunch of bags of holding, so it's like every day they were making these shadows, and they found a workaround to where they wouldn't go away. So they would have them forever. And they also had a workaround for where they could have like a great number of them. The only downside was that they could not control them all if they set them loose. So this player's strategy was, if they got in a real bind, they would open a couple bags of holding and bolt, and then let the shadows attack. And it was pretty formidable, pretty nasty, actually. In fact, they made encounters pretty difficult to plan because these shadows would just tear through almost anything that was sent at them. This made it slightly annoying for me, but kudos to the player. No problem. I have no problem with that. You know what? As a GM, I'll figure that out. If this player is creative and did cool things, I have no problem with it. But here's the problem. This player started to bully the rest of the party with this. They started to hold it over their head. They started to try to take advantage of the power. They started to try to manipulate other players to the point where it was hurting the game experience for the whole rest of the party. The whole rest of the party started to complain. They started to have bad feelings about it. So I talked to the player about it. I was very nice. I said, hey, this is happening and I can understand, blah, blah. And then they were like, basically, they were kind of like, well, this party's, the rest of them, they're kind of acting like babies, in my opinion. If they're not as good at D&D as me, then okay, it's not my fault, which I don't really think is the right approach. And then I said, hey, you're going to have to play nicer. You can't do this. And so he said, okay, I'll play nicer. But he didn't change the way he was playing. He said he would, but he didn't. And the rest of the players were just like, this is frustrating to me. And it even devolved into a couple very tense conversations during the game. And there was one night in particular where one of the players had actually secretly cultivated a way to possibly defeat this character as in case they turned against each other. And this other character does not play min-maxi, but he's very smart and he has the potential to play min-maxi. And he min-maxed himself kind of a backup plan in case they had to deal with this bullying player. And it came about that this player did turn against them. And this player used his deterrent and actually killed the player who was being the bully, quite a surprising and effective manner. He had the absolute custom tailored counter to this player's nonsense, and he was able to use it at the perfect time. So unexpected. And it broke an actual literal argument broke out between them because the player who was being the bully got so mad that because he had lost control of the party, and it just was, this obviously had gotten to a level where it was destructive. So I calmed it down in the moment, and I was just like, hey, let's chill on it. The player kind of even tried to talk back to me a bit and tried to bully me a little bit. And I was like, no, we're not going to do that. I'm not going to have it. Everyone be cool. We're playing a game. We're not here to fight, argue, right? And it was quite a big thing. This is probably the biggest example of this I've seen in a game. But it all came down to having one problem player at the table. And while this player was fun to play with most of the time and a good storyteller and created pretty cool characters, the fact of the matter is they did make it unfun for the others. The next day, I messaged that player and I said, hey, I don't think this is working out. And I basically said, we can't play anymore. You can't come back to the group. You can't play with the group anymore. I removed the player from the group because of the bullying. I wasn't going to stand for it. Because as a GM, you do have to back up your players, and you have to, number one, be responsible for keeping player agency. Number two, be responsible for your players' happiness, the fun. If someone's ruining D&D and people aren't having fun, I don't care how much they may think they're justified. It's not justified. It's sort of like in Star Trek. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. I want the party to have fun. And if a player's min-maxing is going to hurt that, guess what? It's not the rest of the party that's at fault. The rest of the party is right if they agree. That player should change the way they game. And if I'm a player at someone else's table and I go in with a certain way of playing, and then I realize very quickly that that's not compatible with them, I will change out of respect for that group, because I want to be respectful to them, because I want gaming to be a fun, communal experience of creating intellectual art. And if something is hurting that, I don't want that to exist. I would never want to create that, and I would never want to persist in that. I would always want to solve that problem if it came up. So with that being said, there are my 5 tips for how to handle player versus player drama, how to maybe keep it from happening, how to mitigate it if it does, and then what to do if it does happen and goes too far. Sometimes as the GM, you have to make the hard call to say this player isn't working out. And sometimes you have to do that in the defense of your group, out of love for them, out of respect for them. And it's hard to do, but sometimes it is. And sometimes there are players, gamers, who are not compatible with your group, and they will play the role of the bad egg in the situation. So that's all I have to say about that. I hope that you found this helpful. This has turned into a more lengthy video than I was expecting, but there's a lot to be said about it. Please give me a thumbs up and a subscribe if you like the content. I'm here every day creating content about the best game in the world, Dungeons and Dragons. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.